What is up, my seniors, and welcome back. I know we're all foggy-minded right now, so we're going to start slow with something familiar. And we're going to be starting a rhetoric unit. This is Mr. Marks speaking to you. Are you just excited to exist right now? As am I. Happy 2021, y'all. All right, so you should have received the rhetorical analysis guided notes blank worksheet, which you'll be filling out as I speak to you. We'll be using this for a quiz, which we'll be taking, so make sure you follow along as best you can. Of course, you can pause this video at any time. All right, so here's an introduction to rhetorical analysis. We'll be looking at a historical background. We'll be looking at rhetorical appeals and rhetorical devices. We're going to stop before we get to the rhetorical devices. Those are like the fine tuning of the whole thing. So there you go. All right, starting with number one. In historical background, rhetoric definition, my seat is squeaking at me. All right, so the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing, especially by utilizing figures of speech and other compositional techniques. We know that there are three rhetorical argument types, which are ethos, pathos, and logos, also known as appeals. That was the last part of number 2, by the way, on your guided notes. And there are many different rhetorical devices, metaphor, simile, hyperbole, anaphora, used to help develop these appeals. So this is really in line with what we talked about semester 1. The big overarching would be the ethos, pathos, logos, and sometimes kairos, those appeals. And then underneath them we have these devices which help develop our appeals. Moving on, rhetoric's beginning. The use of rhetoric began in ancient Greece. Students during this time were trained in persuasive language techniques. They used these techniques during legal debates and trials. That was number 3 under rhetoric's beginning, right? Ancient Greece was 1 under rhetoric's beginning. And wouldn't you like to be persuasive in your lives? Wouldn't you like to win arguments? Wouldn't you like to have influence? Well, listen up. All right, so let's look at the rhetorical triangle. Aristotle, number 1, defined 3 important elements that any persuasive text should contain. He called these elements appeals. The definition, ways that a speaker can appeal to persuade their or your audience. Take a look at this triangle right here. Number 1 at the top is speaker, right? This person trying to develop their ethos, trying to piggyback on others' ethos to build themselves up, their own credibility. So you'll believe them like, yeah, I feel you, playa. Right here on the bottom left would be audience, pathos. That's going to be number 2. And number 3, bottom right, would be the message, logos. Logos being logic, those facts. When arguing with anyone, you just can't argue with the truth, right? You can try, but really we listen to the facts, the figures, the logic of the whole thing. All men are mortal. Socrates was a man, therefore Socrates was mortal, right? That's called syllogism, logic, logos. Moving on. All right, let's look at ethos right here. Moving on in our guided notes. Number 1, an appeal that relies on the speaker's credibility and trustworthiness. So speaker's credibility and trustworthiness. Subpoints. They're usually accompanied by first-person pronouns, I or me. We're looking at ethos. When I say things like we, when I'm talking to you, trying to influence you, I've suddenly brought you in on my team, which is building my ethos. You want to believe me. Hey, you're part of the team. Okay? Must make the speaker, not any other person, sound credible, trustworthy, or ethical. So it's almost like when we're speaking to influence, we are separating ourselves and elevating ourselves above the herd, everyone else. And lastly, the goal is to make the audience want to listen to the speaker's message because they respect them as an individual. So when we think about ethos, we think about credibility, we think about respect. Okay? There it is, speaker on the top of that rhetorical triangle. Okay? All right, ethos example. I love examples, don't you? Yes! All right. Remember, you can pause me at any time to fill in the blanks. Quote by Richard Nixon in his Four Checkers speech. But just let me say this last word. Regardless of what happens, I'm going to continue this fight. I'm going to campaign up and down America until we drive the crooks and the communists and those that defend them out of Washington. So he's using a lot of personal pronouns. Then he uses that we, right? Good stuff there. And notice how he's separating himself from the crooks and the communists, right? Interesting stuff there. And I'm looking at my notes as I'm looking at your notes. And there you go. Good stuff. Ethos. Let's go on to pathos, emotion, right? An appeal that relies on influencing the audience's emotion. So we're in pathos right there on your worksheet, number 1. An appeal that relies on influencing the audience's emotions. Remember what we said in semester 1. This is a very powerful, out of the gate kind of thing to use, but we don't want to rely solely on emotion because you can only go so far with the heavy weighted words and the tears and the modulating your voice and all of the things. Okay, bullet point number 1, powerful stories, anecdotes, examples, or descriptions that include inspirational moments or sad, unbearable situations. I believe you all remember Mr. Patrick Murphy, our previous president. He was so excellent in his pathos emotional appeals, oftentimes showing his strength by crying or tears, and the things, the anecdotes and the stories that he would tell us were just stellar. Remember him talking about Joseph? Good stuff there. Okay, number 2, incorporates stark contrasts and figurative language to describe situations, ideas, or images. Includes repetition to emphasize powerful points. Includes powerful word choices that are chosen carefully to elicit specific emotions. So we want to be thinking about, be very thoughtful about our word choice, our diction, and how we put them together in syntax. So audience, pathos. Here's an example. I love examples of a moment of pathos from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his I Have a Dream speech. If you haven't listened to that thing all the way through, man, goosebumps for days. Here we go. Stark contrast, emotion. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. That word free elicits such an emotional response, right? 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. Powerful words, guys. We know what all this means. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. My word. What a wonderful, horrible sentiment there. Beautifully spoken by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. What was so powerful about that? What words have such a heavy connotation in your heart? In all of our hearts collectively, really. All right, so logos, onto logic. Can't argue with the facts. An appeal that relies on logic, evidence, and reason. Facts or statistics, bullet point 1. Dates and times of events. There's the camera. We have footage of you at the scene of the crime at 6 a.m. There you go. You can't argue with it. Logical statements that the audience can relate to through reason and past experience. Remember that all men are mortal syllogism, logic statement there? Incorporates evidence that is or appears to be backed up by research. Right? This is why we buy the toothpaste from the commercial that gives us the facts that if, here are the 10,000 people who use this who don't have cavities, right? Here's the statistics. Okay. So here's an example of logos for us from John F. Kennedy in his inaugural address. Facts. And if a beachhead of cooperation may push back the jungle of suspicion, not to mention parallel structure, by the way. Anyway, let both sides join in creating a new endeavor, not a new balance of power, but a new world of law, where the strong are just and the weak secure and the peace preserved. All this will not be finished in the first 100 days. So there's some facts. Nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin. And what a brilliant way to kind of, you know, emotionally charge us, give us facts, and in those facts, it's sort of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So, hey, don't blame me if we don't succeed, but we're going to give it a go, right? Great stuff there. Brilliant. All right, moving on to Rhetorical Appeals, also part of your worksheet. We're going to take a look at some fun advertisements skis. All right, so number 1, a Gatorade ad. Explain which appeal this advertisement includes. Provide evidence in your explanations. You're going to want to look at this and pause me. Let's take a look at the caption. Gatorade always wins. And I'm seeing a bottle ahead of other bottles with the fist raised, and something about a sunset or a sun rising and crossing the finish line and all the things. Analyze this, write down what you think. Number 2, Pepsi ad. Explain which appeal this advertisement includes. Appeals, plural, possibly. Remember, we can double dip, triple dip, quadruple drip. Dip. I said drip, but I meant dip. Provide evidence in your explanations. Crisp, refreshing. Now aspartame free. So no more fake sugar stuff that can cause cancer potentially, right? Analyze this. Everything in the picture and in the words, what's going on there. And write it down. Under Rhetorical Appeals practice. Chick-fil-A. Number 3, explain which appeals this advertisement includes. Provide evidence in your explanation. It says chicken misspelled. That's something very kind of down-home, country, quaint, kitsch about that. Colon, part of a balanced diet. I think I'm a terrible speller, but I think that's misspelled. Chick-fil-A, it's being written by cows who are balancing on this red ball. That's cute and funny, and there's a lot going on there. Misspelled words. What does that connote? What's the connotation? What's the implication, I should say? Yeah, there you go. All right, so for this number 4, I'm going to give you the link in the Canvas assignments. You're going to watch the speech. It's only 3 minutes long and it's powerful. And don't be caught up in the dusty recording in black and white. This is a gentleman who's talking about how our nation, none of you remember 9/11, which was just seared in my mind forever. But this was the 9/11 prior to 9/11. Okay? Follow the link. While you read the speech, gather 3 examples of rhetorical appeals, one of each. So I want an example of ethos, an example of pathos, an example of logos, and then I want you to explain the importance of each quote. How does it impact the audience? You have to explain that for each quote. How does it impact the audience? For pathos, for ethos, for logos. And what were those appeals to pathos, logos, and ethos? How did they do that? So God bless you guys, and I just pray for us this semester, and thank God that we've gotten this far, and we're going to get even farther. We're going to lick this COVID thing, and that's the way it goes, right? Can't wait to see your faces. Bless up. And how do I stop this crazy thing, Jane?